Howdy, howdy, Chris here. Welcome back to the garage. Today we're going to be prepping out a used bumper cover for primer and paint. This is the bumper we have here. This is a bumper off an Acura. So this Acura had some micro checking right here. And micro checking is when the bumper takes an impact and it cracks the paint, okay? Now, sometimes it's hard to see those micro cracks, but those micro cracks need to be sanded out to the bare plastic. In order to do that, we went over this with 320 grit sandpaper and we sanded all those cracks out until they hit plastic. Now this has a lot of little chips and we sanded as much of those out as we could with 320 grit sandpaper. Now there are going to be some other ones that we might have missed, but what we're going to do is primer this so we can fill some of those minor chips, okay? Now, primer's not going to fill all the chips, and if we have to, we'll go back around after we prime it and sand it, and we'll fill any of those minor chips. We're going to paint this whole bumper, so we prepared this whole bumper with 320 grit sandpaper before primer. Now, some of these areas right here, we don't need to add primer to it, but you do need to sand those. So we went around with a red Scotch-Brite to sand those in case we get some overspray on those areas. The primer's going to adhere properly. So this bumper has been sanded and is ready for primer. So if you're repairing just a spot in your bumper, whether it's on the corner or wherever it is, and the rest of the paint is okay on your bumper, then you can just repair that spot and then blend the color out in that spot and then just clear the entire bumper. So the preparation for clearing an entire bumper is 600. You don't want to sand it with 320. If you have no damage out here on your bumper and the paint's perfect condition, all you need to do is sand it with 600 grit sandpaper so that new clear coat adheres properly. You don't want to get any color out here. You just want to sand it with 600 and then put the color on your damaged area and then clear the entire bumper. If you're going to primer over a spot, that needs to be finished sanded with 320 before you primer. That promotes adhesion of that new primer. But it's not so coarse that primer is going to shrink into like a 180 grit scratch or an 80 grit scratch. So 320 before you primer. So we're going to wash this with some isopropyl alcohol. We're going to blow it off first and then wash it all down with a microfiber rag and some isopropyl alcohol. You could use a water-based cleaner. A lot of times I'll use a spray away glass cleaner because it has no ammonia, it has no additives in it. So it's ammonia free, leaves no film, and we'll just spray it down, wipe it with a microfiber towel. And I'll leave some links to these products in the description. Some of these areas where the plastic is showing through, we're going to need to put an adhesion promoter over those areas before we apply our primer. Now we have this dust free, we're going to go over it with 70% isopropyl alcohol. I think this kind of just helps with static, so we're going to spray it down with that. Now we're going to spray all this bare plastic with this upol grip number 4. This upol grip number 4 is an adhesion promoter. Okay. We'll also go around all these hard to reach areas, all these little nooks and crannies, just as like an insurance policy in case we didn't get it sanded perfect. Okay, so this is the primer we're going to be using today. This is the upol System 20 2253. This primer can be used as a high build primer, a primer surfacer, which is a thinner primer, or a sealer. Now, we're going to be using it as kind of in between a high build primer and a primer surfacer today. So if you mix it as a high build primer, it mixes 4-to-1, 4 parts primer, 1 part activator. And this is the activator here. This is a good, really nice system. It's inexpensive and it really does a good job for the money. It's easy to sand and I haven't found a lot of issues with it. Now sometimes if you're using it as strictly a high build primer, you will have some shrinkage with it. You get that with all primers, but I did notice that it does shrink back if you're using it as a high build primer. But as a primer surfacer, it works perfectly. The mix as a primer surfacer, you mix it up 4 parts primer, 1 part activator, and then 1 part reducer, urethane reducer. I'm gonna mix it up in this cup here because we want to strain it before we spray it. You're going to find the 4:1 mixing ratio chart here. So there's 4. So we're going to mix the amount of primer that we want, and then we'll go to the 1 ratio. We'll find that coordinating number and we'll fill it up with activator. Then we'll go to the next one. So this is a 4:1 chart, and we'll find that coordinating number and we'll fill it up with urethane reducer. Now we need to add 1 part of urethane reducer. And now we'll just mix this up. You want to make sure it's mixed up thoroughly because the primer is a very thick product. So this lid right here has the micron filter. So the gun we're using today is this R500. This is a low volume, low pressure paint gun. This is the gun I use as primer. This is outfitted with a 1.5 tip and needle set. So it's a little bit larger tip so it can really lay down that primer nicely. Lock that in. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put 1 coat over the plastic areas first. We'll let that flash off for about 5 minutes, and then we'll put another coat over this whole bumper. Now I'm not going to really try and cover all these edges because it's not necessary that we get those covered in primer. We want to get the main portion of this bumper covered in primer to fill any imperfections, just to create a good sandable surface so we can prep it out for the new paint. Primer gun setup is a full fan pattern. So this is the fan pattern here. We open this up all the way. This is the fluid volume. We opened this up 2.5 turns from closed. So we closed it all the way and opened it up 2.5 turns. Now as far as my air pressure, I'm going to set this probably right around 15 psi. Now that we've got 2 good coats of 2K urethane primer over it, we're going to let this dry overnight, and then we'll inspect it for any chips, nicks, or scratches that we need to fill. We'll sand this with 320 grit sandpaper and apply a base coat, clear coat finish. Listen, I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and commenting down below. And be sure to tune in on the next episode when we apply a base coat, clear coat finish to this bumper, and I give you all the tips and tricks to getting that done. I appreciate each and every one of you watching, and we'll see you next time on Garage Noise. To learn more about paint body repair, check out one of these videos now.